Picture this: you're 8 years old, lying face down on a straw mat in a back alley of Beijing. Your father has left. Your mother is silent. And a man you've never met before is holding a rusted knife. Your legs are tied. Your wrists, too. Another man kneels behind you, pressing down hard on your back to keep you still. There's no doctor, no preparation. Just a bowl of warm water, 2 bricks, and the smell of old blood. The knife flashes. You don't even have time to scream. When you wake up, you're no longer a boy. You're a eunuch. This wasn't punishment. This was application. In imperial China, for nearly 2,000 years, boys like you were mutilated for one reason only: to serve the emperor. The Forbidden City, completed in 1420 under the Ming dynasty, was a walled empire inside an empire. Nearly 1,000 buildings. Thousands of courtyards. And at the center, the emperor, the son of heaven, whose body was too sacred to be touched by any man with lust in his blood. So the solution was simple: remove the lust. Remove the blood. Remove the parts. Only castrated males were permitted to enter the inner court, the private quarters of the emperor and his vast harem of concubines. Ordinary men were not allowed within earshot of the emperor's chambers. But eunuchs, they were everywhere. Guards, cooks, personal attendants, scribes, spies. They were the invisible machinery that kept the palace running. If this is your first time hearing about the real history of China's eunuchs, how they were recruited, mutilated, and used as tools of both loyalty and fear, hit subscribe, like this video, and comment where you're listening from. Because this isn't myth. This is recorded, documented, and archived fact. The numbers alone are staggering. During the height of the Ming dynasty, over 70,000 eunuchs were employed by the imperial palace. That number climbed even higher under the Qing. Most were castrated as children, some as young as 5. And once inside, they never left. Families who couldn't afford to feed their sons would offer them up for castration. The practice was illegal outside official channels, but that didn't stop it. Backstreet cutters performed the operation for silver. The entire genitals, testicles, and penis were removed. This wasn't symbolic. It was total. The wound was then plugged with a pepper-soaked cloth, and the boy was told not to cry. If he survived the infection, he might walk again within a week. If not, he was buried in silence. No name. No grave marker. For those who lived, the next stop was the Forbidden City. You arrive at the outer gates. Limping. Bleeding. Your voice already beginning to rise in pitch. The guards take your papers. No one asks your name. You are assigned a room, a robe, a number. You begin training immediately. Everything in the palace has rules. How to bow. How to breathe in the emperor's presence. How to hold a tray without letting it tremble. How to speak without ever forming a full sentence. Even how to walk, always sideways when entering the emperor's chambers. Never show your back. Never meet his eyes. For most eunuchs, advancement meant survival. Low-ranking eunuchs were given the worst jobs: cleaning the animal pens, sweeping the bathhouses, disposing of waste. Higher ranks brought better food, silk garments, personal access to the emperor. But with power came danger. Because eunuchs weren't just servants, they were tools of court politics. Used, traded, manipulated. Some became spies. Others were promoted as informants. A few rose to incredible power, like Wei Zhongxian during the late Ming dynasty, who effectively ruled the empire for over a decade. But those who flew too high usually fell hard. The court was always watching. Ministers hated eunuchs. Scholars despised them. And emperors trusted them only because they had no family, no loyalty outside the palace walls. A eunuch couldn't pass his wealth to sons. Couldn't father heirs. Couldn't build a rival dynasty. In theory, that made him safe. In practice, it made him disposable. And they were disposed of often. Accusations of theft, of disloyalty, of looking too long at a concubine, any of these could get a eunuch executed. Torture was common. Impalement, beheading, flogging until death. Their bodies were rarely returned to family. Most were burned, their ashes scattered in palace gardens or dumped in secret burial grounds like the infamous eunuch's graveyard in Beijing's Western Hills. Inside the palace, the rules never softened. Even the smallest mistake could be fatal. Drop a teacup. Whipping. Speak without permission. Flogging. Smirk at the wrong time. Gone. But still, thousands of families offered up their sons. Why? Because for the poorest peasants, it was a gamble worth taking. A successful eunuch could become wealthy. Some earned salaries higher than generals. Some controlled access to the emperor himself. And despite their mutilation, some still married, ceremonial wives, often fellow palace servants, arranged by court supervisors to maintain social order. It wasn't about love. It was about control. The Forbidden City didn't need lovers. It needed watchers, runners, scribes, cleaners, men who would never touch a woman, never whisper a secret, never scheme to overthrow the throne. Men with nothing to lose but their lives. The walls of the inner court weren't just physical, they were psychological. Once you entered, you were no longer a person. You were a function. A tray bearer. A bed warmer. A scroll reader. If you performed well, you might be promoted. If you caught the emperor's attention, positively or negatively, you might be reassigned. And if you broke the rules, you didn't get punished. You disappeared. The next time someone walked past your room, it was empty. Just another slot to be filled by the next castrated boy waiting outside the gates. Inside the Forbidden City, silence wasn't just protocol, it was survival. Every corridor echoed with the soft shuffle of cloth shoes, the rustle of silk robes, and the whisper of breath being held. A eunuch's presence was never announced. Their job was to blend in, anticipate needs, and never speak unless spoken to. You're now 14. The scar between your legs has healed into thick, twisted flesh. You walk with a limp. Your voice has changed, it's high, brittle, and carries a strained smoothness that never deepens with age. You serve tea to the concubines. You are invisible. That's the goal. The emperor's harem, known as the inner palace, could number in the hundreds. Only eunuchs were allowed to interact with the women. Regular men would never be permitted within 20 paces. Your job is to deliver food, light incense, escort concubines between chambers, and you're watched the entire time, by other eunuchs, by palace guards, and by the concubines themselves, some of whom carry more political power than most officials. A glance too long, a joke in poor taste, a whisper in the wrong ear, and you're summoned to the Department of Palace Discipline. The punishments aren't written down. They're passed from one eunuch generation to the next. Wooden slats to the back. Bamboo canes soaked in water. Some disappear for days and return crawling. Others never return. One rule is absolute: you do not touch. Not the women. Not the emperor's belongings. Not anything that wasn't assigned to you. A eunuch caught in a concubine's room without a task could be strangled on the spot. The charge? Disruption of heavenly order. You might think being castrated would spare you such suspicion. It doesn't. Paranoia ran deep. Historical records show repeated purges. Under the Ming Emperor Hongwu, hundreds of eunuchs were executed on suspicion of harboring rebellious thoughts. During the Qing dynasty, entire inner court staffs were periodically rotated, imprisoned, or simply disposed of. No trial. No defense. Just names scratched out and new ones added. Why did the emperors keep relying on eunuchs? Because they were useful. More than useful, they were essential. The Forbidden City functioned on an internal bureaucracy where eunuchs occupied roles no minister could fill. They cleaned the emperor's chamber pots. They whispered messages between the wives. They carried secrets no official was allowed to know. They were the emperor's eyes, ears, and, increasingly, his hands. The most powerful eunuchs didn't wear rags. They wore embroidered robes, lived in private suites, and had their own servants. They controlled access to the emperor, filtered petitions, oversaw construction projects, and managed enormous palace budgets. One such man, Liu Jin of the Ming dynasty, was rumored to have wielded more influence than half the imperial court. He was eventually accused of treason and executed, his body sliced into hundreds of pieces in the public square. That was the pattern. Rise high, fall hard. By now, you've served 3 years without incident. You've learned the schedules. You bow at the right angle. You speak in phrases rehearsed 1,000 times. You've seen other eunuchs punished for mistakes you never make. One stole a plum from the kitchen. Gone. Another forgot to extinguish a candle. Gone. One wept at night, just loud enough to be heard by the night patrol. Gone. You don't cry anymore. You don't dream. Your body stopped developing at 10. You're short, thin, and hairless. Your body doesn't produce testosterone. You bruise easily. Your joints ache in winter. You bleed sometimes from the castration wound. But your mind stays sharp. You memorize edicts. You anticipate needs. You begin to earn trust. One afternoon, a steward pulls you aside. You've been reassigned to the Hall of Mental Cultivation. That's where the emperor sleeps. This is a promotion. But it's also a test. The emperor trusts almost no one. His own sons aren't allowed to enter unannounced. But eunuchs, they deliver his meals. Dress him in the morning. Wake him when officials arrive. And sometimes, when the emperor is sick or old, they hold his hand while he coughs blood into silk cloth. That proximity makes you powerful. And dangerous. Which is why your every movement is recorded. Every word you speak is noted. The walls have ears, and most of them belong to other eunuchs. Historical diaries from the Qing era showed just how detailed this surveillance became. Internal logs tracked which eunuch entered the emperor's bedroom at what time, who lit which candle, which servant stirred the soup. If anything went missing, or worse, if the emperor fell ill, heads rolled. Literally. So you play the game. You work silently, efficiently, and above all, loyally. Or at least, you make it look that way. But politics creep in anyway. You see the factions form. Some eunuchs support one concubine, others favor another. Some whisper messages between rival princes. You stay neutral. Or try to. But neutrality is dangerous too. If you aren't useful to someone, you're expendable to everyone. The emperor's world is shrinking. He speaks less, eats less, sleeps less. When he does speak, it's in riddles. You're instructed to laugh when he laughs, cry when he weeps, bow when he breathes. That's not metaphor. One account from a late Qing palace eunuch describes how, when the emperor rose to sneeze, 6 men dropped to their knees in unison, thinking it was a command. This isn't just submission. It's ritualized annihilation of the self. And for you, it's become routine. You wake. You wash. You bow. You bleed. You sleep. You are not a man. You are not a boy. You are a mechanism. A body built to obey. And you're just one of thousands. You're 22 now. You've survived 14 years inside the Forbidden City. You know the palace like a second skin, when to move, when to vanish, when to smile. You know the emperor's expressions. You can predict his moods before he speaks. And because of that, you've been assigned the role of Shiquan Taijian, a full-ranking eunuch of the inner court. You don't celebrate. There's no ceremony. Just a new robe. Slightly thicker silk. A different embroidery pattern. And a verbal warning from your superior. Now they'll really start watching you. Because power here is a balancing act. Step too high, and you provoke ministers. Step too low, and you disappear. You must be useful, obedient, and utterly forgettable, until someone needs you. You speak when spoken to, execute orders exactly, and never accumulate favors. Most eunuchs who fail at this end up in the archives. The archive department of the Forbidden City was where unwanted eunuchs were sent to wither, cold, damp, and buried in paper. You transcribe edicts, copy ledgers, handle rat droppings. You're out of sight, and you stay there until your body gives out. But you're not in the archives. You're still near the emperor. That gives you leverage. It also puts you in danger. Over time, the emperor stops listening to his ministers. He's old, sick, and surrounded by women and eunuchs. The ministers write reports, but you deliver them. They wait outside the walls, but you stand at the emperor's bedside. And as his world shrinks, yours expands. You control information, which means you control access, which means, if you're careful, you can control outcomes. This is how the most powerful eunuchs in Chinese history rose. Not through titles, through proximity. Wei Zhongxian, Gao Lian, and Dahai, names still found in court records, always attached to scandal. Men who became kingmakers, military overseers, imperial favorites. Some managed entire ministries. Some orchestrated purges. One was given a personal temple while still alive. But none of them died naturally. Every powerful eunuch had a reckoning. You know this. So you don't reach too far. Instead, you build relationships. Quiet ones. You bring extra tea to the right concubine. You tell a younger prince where the emperor will be sitting. You make sure a certain official's letter is placed on top of the pile. Small favors. Never traceable. Always deniable. Meanwhile, your body reminds you of what was taken. Your legs swell. You suffer from chronic urinary infections. The wound from castration never healed properly. Every step hurts, but you can't show it. Even pain is regulated. You've seen eunuchs executed for crying out during court processions. You've seen them beaten for sitting without permission. You've watched boys arrive, wide-eyed and hopeful, only to collapse under the weight of a world that never acknowledged them as fully human. One fell ill. Another hung himself in the laundry yard. The morning after, you watched two stewards carry his body out under a blanket. No one spoke of him again. Because grief has no place here. You sleep alone. You own nothing. You are not allowed to write home. If your parents are still alive, they don't know if you live or die. If they wrote to you, the letters were intercepted and destroyed. Most eunuchs were buried in unmarked graves. A few, if they were lucky and had saved enough, commissioned small shrines or urns. But they could never be buried alongside family. Even in death, they were set apart. The palace had its own cemetery for eunuchs, grey stone, no names, just numbers. The lucky ones were cremated and stored in jars. The unlucky were tossed into mass pits. And yet, the institution endured. Because for the emperor, the eunuchs were indispensable. During the Qing dynasty, a eunuch's role expanded even further. They administered royal gardens, managed theater troupes, handled secret correspondence. Some even commanded military logistics, though always unofficially. The emperor didn't trust his ministers. He didn't trust his generals. But he trusted his eunuchs. Not because they were loyal. Because they were trapped. The emperor knew a eunuch had no bloodline, no family, no future. Their existence depended entirely on favor. That made them reliable, for a time. Until they became too comfortable. Then came removal. In one infamous case during the late Qing, a favored eunuch named Dahai was executed by palace order after overstepping his authority. He had accompanied the Empress Dowager on a provincial tour without permission from the emperor. That's all it took. No trial. No appeal. One command. His body was dragged through the streets. His head displayed publicly. A warning to others. You remember that story. Every eunuch does. It hangs over your head like a shadow. So you keep your head down. You stay efficient. You avoid friendships. You smile at the right people, bow to the right threshold, and never let anyone think you're building influence. But the court is changing. The empire is aging. Foreign powers press in. Rebellions spark in the south. The emperor is distracted, and his ministers are divided. The palace becomes more chaotic. Factions sharpen. Rumors of reform float through the walls. And the eunuchs? They're being blamed again. The same pattern repeats. Accusations of corruption, embezzlement, mismanagement. Officials start submitting petitions demanding limits on eunuch power. Some call for mass firings. Others want executions. You listen from behind curtains as your name is mentioned. Not directly. Not yet. But close enough to feel it. So you retreat. You ask to be reassigned to the incense registry. It's a demotion. On paper. But it's safer. There, among storerooms filled with sandalwood and frankincense, you'll spend your remaining years cataloging scents for imperial rituals. You'll be forgotten. Overlooked. Left alone. Which, in the Forbidden City, is the highest form of mercy. The storerooms are dark, but you welcome the stillness. Wooden shelves stacked with lacquered boxes. Resin. Powder. Dried petals. Incense cones carved with imperial dragons. You record shipments, weigh ash residue, check scent quality for temple offerings. No one visits you here, except when the emperor dies or a new altar is constructed. It's the first peace you've known since boyhood. You spend your days in silence, breathing spice and rot, slowly becoming a ghost among fragrant things. There's dignity in the repetition. No more midnight calls. No more secrets to ferry. No more lives to navigate around. And yet, the past never leaves. You sometimes hear your younger self in the corridors, bare feet, nervous cough, always running. You see other boys enter, shorn and stunned, clutching empty bowls. Some don't last a year. Some harden into statues. A few rise quickly. You say nothing to them. You no longer advise. You no longer intervene. You've seen how even mercy can backfire in the palace. One wrongly placed favor becomes a political debt. One moment of empathy becomes grounds for suspicion. So you nod. That's all. They call you Lao Zhong now. Old Zhong. It's not your birth name, no one remembers that anymore. But it's a small comfort. A name that sticks. A proof you lived. Outside, the empire is crumbling. The opium wars have left scars. Westerners walk Beijing streets with parasols and pistols. The emperor is frail, the empress dowager commands behind a silk screen, and the court is hollowing out. Ministers whisper of railroads, banks, new constitutions. But inside the Forbidden City, things remain the same. Ceremonies are still performed. Ancestors still honored. The incense still burns in rhythm. And you, unmoving, unread, unseen, keep the fire steady. When the eunuch purge begins, you already knew it was coming. The new boy who cleans your storeroom tells you quietly, 2 men from the grand wardrobe have vanished. Their beds stripped. Names erased. No announcement. No bodies. You nod. By now, you've lived through 4 emperors. You've outlasted dozens of ministers. You've memorized the turn of every court faction. And you know how power ends, not in speeches, but in silence. Then one morning, the order reaches you. All non-essential eunuchs are to vacate the inner court within 10 days. Registrars will determine continued placement. Final pensions to be reviewed by Ministry of Rights. It's written with perfect calligraphy. Signed with an imperial seal. Delivered by a steward you trained. You fold the order gently. You don't argue. You don't pack. You have nothing to take. Your last day, you rise before dawn. You sweep the ash from the offering trays. You replace the lotus incense. You bow 3 times to the ancestral shrine. No one watches. That's fine. You exit through the east gate, one of the lesser-used exits, near the fish ponds. The guards glance at your robe. They don't stop you. Outside the red walls, Beijing groans like a wounded beast. Banners hang torn from buildings. Telegraph wires buzz overhead. Street vendors shout in Mandarin, Cantonese, even English. You step into it cautiously, like entering a foreign country. You have no family, no home, no use. You rent a small room above a vinegar shop. You sell incense recipes to a monk from Hangzhou. You survive off rice, tea, and habit. Sometimes, out of nowhere, a former steward will recognize you and buy you a bowl of noodles. But mostly, you're forgotten. A few years later, you hear the Forbidden City has fallen. The last emperor, a child named Puyi, was forced to abdicate. The Qing dynasty is over. Warlords divide the capital. Eunuchs are chased from the streets. Some are beaten. Some are executed. You keep your head low. You never return to the palace. Instead, when your health begins to fail, you donate your last coins to a small Buddhist temple and ask to be cremated quietly. You leave no heirs. No tombstone. Just a box of ash placed under a sandalwood tree. 100 years later, tourists will walk the marble paths of the Forbidden City. They'll take photos of the golden roofs, marvel at the dragon motifs, admire the throne rooms. Few will wonder about the men who once served there. Fewer still will know what it cost. And almost no one will speak of you, the child who bled, the man who bowed, the eunuch who endured. But you lived. That, in the end, was rebellion enough. Enjoyed this video? We explore real, lesser-known histories with brutal honesty and full emotional depth. Subscribe for more stories that mainstream textbooks leave out.